Hello, and welcome back to my video series showcasing M&T 2.0. I'm Demian Sky. This week, by popular demands, I've decided to go over buildings and their role in 2.0. Suffice to say, a lot has changed since the previous version, and especially so since Europa Universalis 4 Vanilla. And you can see right off the bat, one of the big differences is that A, we have more building slots available, and B, all of the building slots are now open. There is no more arbitrary limitations on what you can or cannot build as far as building number is concerned, and a lot of the constraints as far as tech constraints on a lot of buildings have been removed as well, because now we have more organic economic limitations in place. And so in previous versions of M&T and in EU4, it was really easy to cap out your buildings, and then you would go slamming into a tech limit, on the next building that you wanted to build in every single province. And so you'd wait until you get the tech, and then you'd get the tech, and then you'd spam the building in every single province. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. Instead, developing your economy is much more progressive and much more difficult, and even in your capital, even in your biggest city, it's unlikely that you'll ever completely cap out on buildings. And I'll show you why in a bit. First off, though, it's important to distinguish between the fact that there are two different types of buildings, two major classes. All the buildings you see here, more or less, are what you would call urban buildings. These are all buildings that you will have in cities. However, we also have rural buildings as well, rural infrastructure. And these buildings you actually can't build manually. You can't just click and build, for instance, a new farm estate for a variety of reasons, which are historical, but more importantly, for game balance issues. And basically, what we had to do in 2.0 was thoroughly separate rural population-oriented buildings from urban population-oriented buildings, because there's just such a tremendous disparity between populations in different parts of the world. So, for instance, if we go to an Irish province, we can see the population can be quite tiny. And so if you were to build a farm estate for 100 ducats here, and its effect multiplied into the total population, the value of that building, what you'd be getting out of it, would be tiny compared to, say, a building built in the Ganges Delta, where you have literally 80 times more people, right? If you were to build the same building here and they had the same effect on the rural population, then provinces in India would be developing 80 times faster than Ireland, and it would just be a tremendous headache. So you cannot build these rural buildings manually, and what we did was actually scaled the cost when you build it through events and such, based on the carrying capacity of the province itself, right? So, for instance, a farm estate or plantation in India with 80 population would cost 80 times more than a rural building in Ireland with only 1 population. There aren't that many rural buildings, and historically you didn't really have central governments, out on farms, literally, hoeing fields or building, rural buildings and things like that. So that's mainly the domain of your estates and local powers and the people that live there themselves. Where you, as a central government, have much more power is in the urban domain, right? With urban population, right? So all of these buildings you see in the building menu are all essentially buildings which improve a city and attract more people to live in the city. And so we'll go through a couple of these now. So you can see there's generally 3 different major activities that go on in the city. You have trade and commerce related, so you have the market line, right, the trade power line, which improves trade power. And you can see, for instance, the Merchant Guild here in Granada gives trade power, right, both a modifier and a base value, but then it also gives urban gravity as well, which attracts people to live in the city. And so you can see the local trade power plus 25% would end up multiplying into all of the trade power that the urban population creates as well. And so you can see here, this is the trade line. Another major activity in a city is urban manufacturing, urban production, where you create special urban goods. And we have a whole lot of special goods, that don't exist here in the conventional trade good section of the province view. Instead, any province which has a building in the urban production line will end up producing an urban good. You can see Granada produces silk. And so you can see that just like the marketplace and the commerce line, the production line gives you urban gravity. It gives you something called urban production power. It works the same way as trade power, essentially. And to fill your workshops, you actually need a sufficient number of urban dwellers. So you can see, as we hover over Corporation Guild, which is something Granada also has, you can see that it has 0.9 potential, which means it can sustain 9 workers, and each one of those workers produces 0.1 production power. And you can see, since we have 0.9 potential, we end up producing 0.9 silk. And the other major activity that attracts people to live in cities, in the major class of buildings, is your various types of government buildings. And of course, you have the actual capital itself, which attracts bureaucrats. And it has a significant cost, but it also has a significant amount of gravity. And so capitals of large empires can get very, very large just on government buildings alone. And we're also contemplating the bureaucracy estate being capable of basically being the estate of a province if their presence there is powerful enough. But other than just the capital building, we have also regional capitals. And then we have education buildings, which educate your upper classes and some of your city folk. And then we have art schools and art academies as well, which Cardinal currently is working on art power, where depending on how many art schools you have and how well you finance them, you can attract artists, and you produce you accumulate art inside of a city to showcase its grandeur and things like that. And so aside from those 3 major areas that those 3 major reasons why cities exist, right? Commerce, production, and bureaucracy. You have hybrid buildings as well, right? So we have a warehouse line, a very short warehouse line. But warehouses are interesting in that they kind of help with everything. So they'll actually help with rural stuff. They give you a bonus to rural wealth. And they give you local production efficiency too, which helps with rural and production related things. And so if you go to some place like Paris, it could be handy to build a warehouse because you have a little bit of each. And warehouses can actually be very helpful if you're a super rural society out in Poland or something. And if you want to initially benefit your rural population while simultaneously urbanizing, you can build warehouses because they give you some gravity too. So initially, they help with the rural population, but then they can help build up your cities as well. If you don't want to just vault straight into building full-on urban buildings, because the initial urbanization process can be quite slow. Right, so you have warehouses. The last building in the warehouse line has a special power, and what it allows you to do is to more easily tap into the imported food market. And so, for instance, in Andalusia, we have a decent amount of surplus food, 17 surplus food, right? So we can build up any kind of new city we might want to build fairly easily. If you go someplace like Ireland, where we don't really have that much surplus food, what we can do is build the warehouse district, and it'll allow you to import more food to that relatively food-starved location and allow you to build up a city in places where the food supply normally wouldn't allow you to do it. Okay, so aside from warehouses, we also have what is known as the urban infrastructure line. And urban infrastructure doesn't really give you a whole lot more than just straight up gravity. You can see, Granada here has rank 2 urban infrastructure. And what it does, it tends to be pretty expensive, but what it does is helps your city grow and simply make it more hospitable for people, in order to fully take advantage of the various industries that might be there. So for instance, if you just build a workshop, it'll not even attract one urban pop. I mean, it might after many years, and you can see that a workshop has plus 0.5 potential, which means you need 5 people to fully explore the workshop. So if you want to be able to really make a workshop effective, you need more gravity, and one way to do that is you can build more urban infrastructure. And you can see, for instance, in places like Cordoba, we have a workshop and then 2 ranks of urban infrastructure, which allows Cordoba to attract enough people to make a decent amount of urban goods. Okay. So we also have other buildings which aren't explicitly rural or urban. So roads, of course, are a good example. You can see roads, they don't give you any base gravity, but they will multiply into the base gravity that you already have. And you can see, for instance, in Granada, we have 4 base urban gravity. So if we were to produce a road there, it would multiply that 4 by 20%. So you could actually get an extra full urban gravity just by building a road there. And of course, all the roads scale up their effects. Then you also have 2 port lines, one which is commerce-based, and then another which is military-based, your shipyard type places. And you can see they have really pronounced effects as far as improving construction and improving your force limit, but they have a negative effect on your tax income too. It just costs a lot to maintain them, and they have a fairly significant influence on base urban gravity too. So when you go to places like Venice, I believe they have a dry dock, that base urban gravity there ends up adding a pretty significant portion to the population. Alright, let's see if we have anything else. Of course, forts are pretty important too to give a little bit of urban gravity. And that's about all of the buildings. There's mines too. Mines are rural, but as has often been the case in history, if you end up having a really wealthy mine someplace, you tend to have a little boom town pop up around the mine. And so the same thing happens in game. If there's a mineral deposit, and you build a mine there, then it'll end up giving you some base urban gravity. Don't want to get too much into it right now, but mines do exhaust, and there's a limited amounts of mineral in a given deposit, and so it will exhaust over time. So you'll have a boom and then a bust. A mine will be super lucrative for a while, and then it'll kind of taper off unless you discover a new deposit there. Okay, so that's all that for now. Now, a lot of you are probably wondering about balance, right? If you're able to just build as many buildings as you want, what stops you from just being able to build completely out of control and snowball like crazy, like you were able to do in previous builds of MNT and vanilla EU4? Well, this was actually something I really had to think about pretty intensely in order to come up with a good solution. As EU4, even with the modding tools, wasn't really constructed for this kind of system. And that's why, for instance, I had to separate the effects of urban buildings and rural buildings from one another. But what I also did was, let's go back to Granada for a second. What I also did was added a scaling component based on how big your city is, how much money has been invested in the various buildings there. And so you can see if you have at least 3,000 ducats of urban urban buildings, I'll probably have to rename this, then the next building you build will cost an additional 180%. And so if I wanted to build a marketplace in Marabella, only 180 ducats. If I want to build it in Granada, if I didn't have it already, it would be 450 ducats. And so you can see what ends up happening is the more you build in a city, the more and more powerful it becomes, the more profitable it becomes. But there's resistance to extremes in this case. If we go to Cairo, which is one of the biggest cities in the world at gamestart, you can see that there's 8,000 ducats of urban infrastructure, which increases local build cost by 450. You can see the city itself generates tons of income, right? It generates nearly as much income as a small country. Not to mention it has a huge wealth modifier bonus, and the city itself gives a lot of extra cool bonuses. But if you want to build another building there, it's pretty astronomically expensive. So you can see a market here would be 800 ducats. It seems like a lot of money, but when you consider that the effect of the next building will multiply into all 35 of the urban population, then spending 800 ducats on a market in Cairo would be just as valuable probably as spending 400 ducats or 350 ducats on a market in Granada. But there's still an incentive, even though there's 35 pop in Cairo, to possibly build a marketplace someplace else in a smaller city, right? Or in another location, build up a city somewhere else, because real estate is cheaper, right? So if you wanted to build, buildings here, you can see there's, no infrastructure there, so everything is pretty cheap. Also, we have, like in the previous build of M&T, we have development ratings, right? If you recall, in the previous build of M&T, your country had development bonuses based on the average development of your entire country based on how many provinces you have. Well, there's no such thing as development values up here now because it's all pop. And so those development bonuses are now based on the total value of all of the infrastructure in your country divided by the number of people in your country. So let's see, where's my population? I changed everything. Well, anyway, there's 60 people, 60 pops in Granada, which is 600,000 people. And the development is based on, right, the value of all the infrastructure. You would the game adds up, the value of all the infrastructure in the country, and it divides it by the 60 pop, and you end up with decent development, which gives various types of bonuses. And you'll see that the more developed your country becomes, the higher build costs tend to go too. Works the same way in real life, right? We're seeing that right now in the post-industrial world. And so you get extra bonuses, but then you have higher build costs across the board because you've plucked all of the low-hanging fruits. And so then you go other places. So it's probably like Poland. And we can see, right, they have low development, which gives them some negative penalties, but gives a better build cost, so it makes it easier for them to catch up. Another little detail I'll get around to exploring in greater detail in a different video is countries which create a lot of urban goods get special bonuses based on how much of those goods they create divided by the population. And so Granada was well known for creating a lot of silk in the city of Granada. And so because they produce so much silk, they get this plentiful silk modifier. There's 5 levels for each type of good. You can see it gives provincial trade power, better advisor cost, better administrative tech cost. And these bonuses are based on the sort of theme of the good, right? So if you have a bunch of bureaucrats, if you have plentiful silk in your society, then all of your upper class and bureaucrats can wear it. They're taken more seriously and have higher prestige and esteem. Castile produces, I believe, a good amount of steel in Toledo. And so they get, where'd it go? At least I thought they had it. Oh well. I guess, you don't see the steel bonus because they actually simply have too many people in the country, right? That steel that they are creating is kind of diluted by the sheer number of people. So one thing you guys probably noticed is that there is a significant cost for a lot of buildings for not necessarily a heck of a lot of gain compared to previous versions of M&T. So it used to be, you would build a building and then within 10 years it would pay for itself. And so you just had crazy runaway growth. When you built a building, it made it easier to build another building, which made it easier to build another building. And that kind of positive feedback loop doesn't really exist anymore. You build a building and it makes you more powerful and it gives you more money, but building the next building doesn't necessarily become easier as a result. And so what that acts to do, and of course that's a result of the various downward pressures that exist. And so what that means is that there's pretty much for most of the game there's room for expansion as far as your economy is concerned, and there's room to become more powerful economically. I know a lot of beta testers had difficulty even completely building out their capital by the end of the game. Nonetheless, building, buildings in every single province, right? So typically what you can expect in 2.0 is that even if you are quite advanced and have a very successful game, you generally are not building every kind of building in every province. You usually have core cities, which a lot of commerce is oriented around. And while you might build roads, in a lot of important places, it's unlikely that you're going to be building every single building, because by the time you get up to a Cairo-sized city, you can see that the local build costs become quite astronomical. And so typically what I've seen, at least in my own games and a lot of the beta testers, is you have a few metropoles, and if you want to, you can have broader-based urbanization by having a few buildings in every single province. But by and large, you won't see the kind of building spam that you saw in previous builds, and to me, that's a relief. Okay, so that's it for now. As you can see, there's plenty of more subject matter to go over, especially as we continue development. Hopefully I'll be able to keep to a relatively consistent schedule when it comes to releasing videos. Had a lot of real-life things happening recently, like hurricanes smashing into my hometown, but yeah, from here on out, I should be able to be on a good development schedule, as well as release some videos. Go ahead and swing by the forums if you haven't already on Paradox, and join the conversation. I'll see you guys next time.